Citrus Heights City Manager Henry Tingle speaks on Measure K financial analysis.
Well, good evening, everyone. You guys are probably our ninth neighborhood associations that we've had an opportunity to talk to you a little bit about Measure K. You are the first that we've actually been videotaped. We're going to try to keep this thing as natural as we can and sharing the information to you. We've been a city for 15 years now, and we've been able to accomplish an awful lot of things. I don't think anyone can deny that. So to be here tonight to talk to you about a tax measure and why, as it's important that you really understand the facts, why we presented it to the council in June, why the council unanimously approved putting it on to the ballot. There are some very real challenges that we're going to be faced with over the next few years, and we're going to show you this a little bit in the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, it's big. I think maybe we have to turn these lights on. Yeah, that's a little better. Okay, the city is facing 5 major challenges over the next few years. Since the recession kicked in a few years ago, our general fund revenues have declined significantly, along with our street revenue for street resurfacing and street maintenance. Our streets are now at a tipping point in terms of the condition of them. Many of them have now moved into the fair to poor condition. David's going to talk a little bit more about that. The need to upgrade and maintain our police technology and equipment, and to be able to build a program around prevention of crime, youth crime, and the violence prevention. And probably the most important of the 5 is the state prison realignment. Back in October of 2011, the governor and the state passed Assembly Bill 109, which more commonly is called prison realignment. And Tom is going to get more specific in it, but it's a bill that basically creates a whole new category of prisoners that are now being released into the community. We're going to talk about the impact it's having on Citrus Heights and the state as a whole. But basically, there's about 40,000 prisoners that would normally be in prison under this new bill are now moving into our communities. So basically, what has happened since the recession, our general fund revenue has declined by $5.7 million. That's our catch-all revenue. We can use that for just about anything in terms of city services. And then our transportation revenue is down $4 million. So just a few years ago and today, we're operating on just under $10 million a year less than just a few years ago. Let me break it down in terms of our general fund and what happened. This category here is the recession, and this is due to the state budget crisis. So basically, since the recession kicked in, our sales and use tax is down about $1.7 million annually. Investments on revenue, as many of you may or may not be aware, Citrus Heights have been able to achieve significant revenue reserves over the 15 years of our incorporation. Currently, we have about $33 million in reserve on a $30 million operating budget. So we have over 100% of our annual general fund operating budget in reserve. So the investment revenue is basically we take that money and we reinvest it and we generate interest income. Unfortunately, as many of you are aware, interest rates have been terribly low for a number of years now due to the housing crisis and the recession and so forth. So that money is not generating the interest that it was just a few years ago. And so that's costing us about $1.4 million a year. Building and planning fees are down by a little under $400,000. It just tells us that we're still not increasing our building. And the fact that Citrus Heights is a built-out community, we rely very heavily on housing, turning over, and tenant improvements and upgrading homes and that type of thing, and we haven't been having a lot of that. And each time a property transfers to a new owner, we get a transfer tax. That's down about $83,000, so that also tells us that we're still very much not to our previous years in terms of property selling in the city. Now, the area that we really don't have any control over, and that's the state budget crisis. So what the state did to help to solve their budget crisis, they basically took from local government. And in a nutshell, this figure right here, $2.1 million is what the state took away from Citrus Heights over the last few years to try and tackle their budget problem. It didn't really do anything because they still got billions of dollars in deficits, but it did have a significant impact on taking revenues away from the city. So what they did is they took money away from our motor vehicle license revenue in these two categories here, Senate Bill 89, and they shifted the formula how they determine how we get vehicle license revenue. It used to be based on the actual registration and licenses and new cars and so forth, but what they did is they changed the formula, so we now get it based on property tax values as opposed to actual fees. So if property taxes go down, we get less revenue, whereas before that wasn't a factor in how we generated our revenue. So that's where the state got the windfall. Then our COPS grants were reduced by about 69,000. So due to the state budget crisis, they actually took away about 2.1 million, and that accounts for the roughly 5.7 million in revenue loss that we were talked about earlier. And then the other category is transportation. Our Measure A, maintenance and construction, which is our main source of revenue. As some of you may or may not recall, in 2004, the Measure A went back before the voters for a 30-year renewal. The city of Citrus Heights and our mayor slowly was opposed to the language in terms of the way it was structured, because basically cities like El Grove, Rancho Cordova, City of Sacramento, and the County of Sacramento had a big gain on the way they reformulated what you guys voted on. And basically what they did is they shifted it from local use to what are called projects of regional significance. So like El Grove, they got bridges over across 99 because it had a regional significance. Some of the work you see on 50 and 80, they shifted the revenues from local projects to what are considered projects of regional significance. We were opposed to it because Citrus Heights, the way we are geographically, there weren't really any real regional projects of significance, and so we lost just a little less than $4 million a year as a result of that renewal. We have been successful with a lot of federal grants and state grants on projects that you see that are currently going on in the city right now. And those projects that David has under construction, the monies that we were able to get for those projects can only be used for the large streets like Sunrise and Auburn Boulevard and so forth. So basically, what we did a few months ago is my office had proposed a revenue measure to fill some of the gap that has occurred due to the recession and due to the state budget crisis and the takeaways. And so basically we propose a revenue measure that would generate approximately $2 million a year in new revenue for the city. 50% of it, $1 million, would go to street resurfacing, and the other $1 million would go for additional police officers, equipment and technology, and programs to prevent youth crime and violence. So David's going to talk a little bit about street resurfacing plan. Stephanie's going to go over the numbers with you, and then I'm going to summarize it after Tom, and then we'll open it up. The mayor may want to make a comment, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Financial Director Stephanie Daniels speaks on Measure K financial analysis.
Good evening. Tonight I'll go over the dollars behind the measure. So right now our current utility user tax rate is 2.5%. Everybody pays that on their utility bills already. Some of you might not even notice it. It's a line on the bill. It's 2.5% of your current utilities. An increase of 1.75% would generate approximately $2 million. And everyone pays the same rate, and it's based on their utility usage. So the 1.75% increase would amount to 87.5 cents for every $50 of utilities billed. And we currently collect on telephone, sewer, we collect on electric, but the first $45 in monthly residential charges are exempt every month. We collect on gas, and the residential baseline rate is exempt every month. And we collect on cable TV. We do not collect on satellite TV or internet. So this is a sample of a household's monthly utility bills. In this sample, the electric bill was $111, and the increase would be $1.15. The gas bill of $54, the increase would be 50 cents. The sewer bill of $40, the increase is 70 cents. Cable bill of $87, the increase is $1.50. And the telephone of $56, the increase is $1. So total monthly bills for this household of $350 per month, and the increase would be under $5 per month. And now I'm going to turn over to the city manager, who's going to have some closing remarks. Thank you.
Citrus Heights City Manager Henry Tingle concludes the financial analysis on Measure K.
You know, I think one of the reasons why we've been fairly successful as a city for our first 15 years of incorporation is because we don't play politics. We do what we believe is in the best interest of this community. When I brought this measure before the city council, right in the middle of an election year, council members up for re-election, but we don't have time to put it off. This AB 109 is serious and is having a profound effect not only on the city, this region, and the state as a whole. By the time this bill is fully realized, it will go down in history as one of the worst pieces of legislation in terms of our public safety. Now, when I proposed this plan, as I said earlier, it will generate $2 million a year. This measure requires the highest threshold of citizen approval, 2/3, 66%. That is very difficult to get a 66%, but I said, you know, we've worked hard over the last 15 years. I wanted to ensure that if the community did support this measure, that once I retire in a few years and our council turns over, that they can't get different ideas about how they want to spend that money. So with the 2/3 approval, the highest threshold, the money is restricted. So the way you just saw it on this PowerPoint presentation is the way it's going to be spent for the next 10 years. This money cannot be used to raise my salary, improve my benefits, or my existing staff. This money can only be used specifically for the additional officers that Tom talked about and for actual street resurfacing that David talked about. It is restricted for that use. No city council, no city manager can change that use. The only people that can change it over the next 10 years are the people that voted for it. So that's the way I structure it. So it would be a 2/3 approval, which is extremely difficult to get. It will be restricted use because that's the only way I can restrict the money. If a lot of cities do that 50+1, it's called bait and switch. They tell you what they're going to use it for, give us 50% and we're going to use it for this, but it doesn't hold them to that. The 2/3 approval holds them to that. It sunsets in 10 years, which means after 10 years it expires. 10 years from now, whoever the manager is at that time and the city council can decide if they want to bring it back to you for renewal or just go away. Coincidentally, the 10-year period of this proposed measure also coincides with the ending of revenue neutrality. I don't know if a lot of you are aware of what revenue neutrality was, but again, due to the state of California, when Citrus Heights voted to incorporate, we had to enter into a revenue agreement with the county to keep them whole, even though they no longer had major responsibility for this part of the county, because we took that as a city. We had to negotiate something with them. And so we had to give up our property tax for 25 years. By the end of revenue neutrality, which will end in December 2022, we will have given the county $93 million of property tax revenue that would have normally gone into this community. That's every city that incorporates since Citrus Heights did. That bill was mainly geared for us, but everyone is affected. They have to enter into some type of agreement. So at the end of revenue neutrality, it was less than 10 years ago, so we're over the hill and we're coming down now. We'll be anywhere from $4 to $5 million of new revenues will come in at that point. And at that time, Measure K revenue may not be needed 10 years from now. So that's why I put the 10-year sunset clause in there. And when the county adopted this utility user tax many years ago, technology has changed significantly in terms of how we use technology. So what the measure also does is it upgrades our utility users provisions for telephone and video so that everyone is paying the same rate. I wanted to talk a little bit about the general fund reserves, because there are people that are saying, you know, you got $33 million in reserve, why don't you just use that to fix the streets and hire more officers? Well, that's really one-time money, and you don't create ongoing expenses using one-time money, number one. So, but basically, we are proposing to draw down some of those reserves over the next 10 years, up to $10 million if necessary, depending on this California economy. It's been in a recession for many years now. The law of averages has got to catch up with California sooner or later, and we got to come out of this recession. So over the next decade, we may not need to draw down a full $10 million if we can get this state back into a growth mode. So, but we're proposing to draw down up to $10 million of the reserves to augment the street resurfacing plan, so that general services will actually have about 2.3 million, 1 million from Measure K, 1 million from reserve, and the 350,000 that is currently allocated. That money will go specifically for neighborhood street resurfacing. It's probably unrealistic to say that we're going to have $23 million at the end of 10 years, because other things could come up over the next 10 years that could impact that. I didn't mention my first part of the slide, but I think most of you are aware that the state took away the redevelopment program from us. Let me give you two simple projects, well, not simple, but two projects that are examples of how we utilize that redevelopment. Sylvan Corners, that was a redevelopment project, and the 24-hour fitness and the Rite Aid drugstore, that was a redevelopment project. That's how you utilize redevelopment to eliminate blight. We were very successful, and we're doing very well. One of our major projects that was also in part to be funded by redevelopment was the Auburn Boulevard. You guys see the work that's starting on Auburn Boulevard. That project, when we're through with that project, all the overhead utilities on Auburn Boulevard will be underground. The whole complete street is going to be completely rebuilt. All new sidewalks, curbs and gutters, median down the middle, new street lights, landscaping. It's going to be a beautiful stretch from Sylvan Corners to just north of Rush Park. That's the phase that we're working on now. And we're getting ready to start the next phase in terms of right-of-way and design from there to the freeway. So basically, the purpose of general fund reserves is for one-time expenditures that don't add to the ongoing operating expense of the city. An example of that is our community center across the street. When we built it, we also designed a model in terms of use of it so that it pays for itself. So we spent $14 million to build that community center. The 2 years that it's been in operations cost us about $300,000 a year to operate it. We generate about $340,000 a year in booking revenues that we get from the facility. So the facility is not costing the city anything to operate. The expansion of our police service center, some of you may have saw it under construction going by the post office. That's a one-time expense. Economic uncertainty has never been so great in California. You guys are all aware we have a proposition on the ballot to raise your sales tax. This will generate $6 billion a year. I don't know what's going to happen on that, if it's going to pass or not. But the bottom line is, if it fails, that's $6 billion that the state's going to have to cut out of their budget, and that's going to have a ripple effect. That, I'm not advocating to vote for it or vote against it, but if it should fail, that will cost the city about another $500,000 in revenue. Natural disasters, I mentioned earlier, interest on our income, on our reserves. You know, the city is built out. And when I got here 14 years ago, and then they made me the manager, and I looked at the city, and I looked at this very closely, that the fact that this community is built out. So we don't have a lot of opportunities for growth, like you saw in Elk Grove, Folsom, Roseville, and all those communities actually laid off employees. And I'm proud to say that we've never laid off employees, and I'm also proud to say that we've never issued any debt in the history of our city. So this city is debt-free, and so I convinced and recommended the policy direction to the council years ago that we would be a pay-as-you-go city. So everything that we own in terms of the infrastructure, we own it outright. This whole civic center, community center, police building, none of that was on bond debt, because I don't like debt. So everything has been paid for with cash to date. We've saved our money, and we are a debt-free city. If the recession gets worse, there may come a point where our operating expenses exceed our revenue. If that happens until our revenue neutrality ends in 2022, we may need to draw down some reserves to augment our operating budget. We haven't had to do that for 15 years. We've had a balanced budget every year for 15 years. But it's getting extremely difficult with these state budget takeaways. The redevelopment that I was talking about earlier, that takeaway cost us about $1 million in revenue. And when there's opportunities, innovative opportunities for the betterment of the community, we may draw down some one-time money to improve the community. So again, Measure K will generate $2 million. The plan is to allocate up to $1 million of reserves, which will give street resurfacing $2 million, plus the $350,000 that David has in his current budget will go for street resurfacing. The $625,000 is for the 5 additional officers, 4 of them for Assembly Bill 109 and 1 for our youth intervention. $250,000 for police equipment and technology, and $125,000 a year for youth and crime violence prevention programs. So what I'd like to do is give the mayor and the vice mayor an opportunity to speak, and also we have Councilmember Turner here if he'd like to speak also, and the mayor is coming up now, and then your vice mayor, Steve Miller. And then after they speak, we can just open it up to questions.
General Services Manager David Wheaton speaks on neighborhood street conditions and improvement plan.
Good evening. I'm going to go back to one of those slides just to show this slide right here, just to elaborate a little bit on this because I want to make a point that has a lot to do with my presentation. When we were, before this measure passed, at the sort of the height of our street pavement program, we were spending close to $3 million before the formula changed. And so if you can think back during the 04, 05, 06 fiscal years, there was a lot of street pavement going on. I mean, we were doing some larger streets, and you saw Greenback, that's a whole different set of funding. But for local dollars, in terms of what we were collecting at the time, we were spending close to $3 million. Now all that money's gone, and basically what we're spending now is about $350,000 a year, and I'll talk about that in more detail. Our goals for the next 10 years, for the time that Measure K will be in effect, we hope to achieve these goals. We will be resurfacing neighborhood streets only. This doesn't apply to the larger streets. The arterials, the Sunrise, the Greenbacks, the Auburn Boulevard, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. We want to improve safety in the neighborhoods, improve the street maintenance cost over time, because that helps us overall with our costs, and to remove blight and improve community image. The one thing that I sort of illustrate is that if you go into communities that are on the downside of their funding, the Stocktons, the Vallejos, the other communities that are having issues with their budgets, the Oaklands, and some other locations, if you ever drive through those communities, the first sign of a decline in what's going on in those communities are the roads. I mean, you as visitors, or if you have family there and end up in those communities, one of the things you may comment on is the condition of the roads. And that's the one thing with Measure K we want to try to avoid. Our current resurfacing needs, overall, $50 million. It's a pretty big number. Our arterials, which isn't a part of Measure K, is $21.7 million shortfall. We're eating into this number now with some of the work that we're doing on Auburn Boulevard, Sunrise. We have 3 phases on Sunrise we are funded for. That's federal and state monies. That money can only be used for those types of projects. We have a project on Mariposa that's being funded with federal grant money and state grant money. It's Safe Routes to School monies. And we have a Safe Routes to School project that's on Antelope Road right now in Loppy Lane. And that's all state money. All those projects are funded. And so that takes a little bit out of this. And the concern I have in this is sort of in the future. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to do with San Juan Boulevard as an example. It's a road that's in very, very poor condition, and we don't have any funding for that. But this is, again, all state and federal monies that we're spending now that you see out in the streets, and that's covered. Cannot be used for residential streets. So the streets in front of your homes, the residential streets, cannot be used in the funding that we receive for the arterials. Residential need is $28.3 million. Again, and I will be a little bit redundant, but we have $350,000 a year currently to fund residential street repair. Next slide, please. Again, our residential need is $28.3 million. Over a 10-year period, $350,000 gives us $3.5 million. Again, that sounds like a lot of money if it was in our personal bank accounts, but in order to do streets, it's not much at all. If you all recall the time that we did Greenback, that latest project, when we totally rebuilt Greenback, great job, was federal monies, state monies, that cost us about $4 to $6 million in total. And so $3.5 million over a 10-year period doesn't do much at all for us. Again, a couple things I want to point out here. First of all, the condition of our streets that are good to excellent in this area here, 35% of our streets. We have over 1,000 streets, over 1,200 streets actually. Fair to poor, in this condition here, 65% of our streets are in that condition, and I'll give you some examples of what some of those fair to poor streets look like. But I also want to point out this, is when our streets are in this type of condition, excellent to good, the cost is very minimal for repairs. And so every time we pave a street over, it should last us about 20 years. And so it should be in fairly good service. But within that 20-year period, you might need a little bit of fixing up. Might be some potholes, and might be some other things that occurs during that time. But it's only going to cost us 50 cents a square yard to do that. But in the fair to poor, in which 65% of our streets are in, they can get upwards to $18 on average But I can tell you, and I'll show you some examples, where many of our streets are costing us beyond $18 a square yard, and some anywhere between $20 to $25 a square yard. These are some examples of streets that are in fair to poor condition, and part of the reason why we show you those around schools, because those are the biggest concerns we have in terms of safety. And these are actual streets. I mean, these aren't taken from Facebook or any other thing that we might load into our computers. These are actual streets in our neighborhoods, and I'm not proud of this at all. But it's our reality, and it's what we have to deal with. And these streets, go back. These streets are around schools. It creates conditions that we don't look forward to people driving in. And you all understand that around schools, I mean, you all have raised kids and grandkids, and you know what goes on around schools when schools are about to start, when schools let out. You see a lot of traffic and a lot of cars, and parents don't necessarily drive the best, but this is what they have to deal with, and this is not something that we want to condone. Next slide, please. These are streets, these are actual streets, and these are not pictures that I've taken or my staff have taken. These are pictures that were given to me after we made a presentation in Area 5. One of the residents said, "David, I saw your pictures, and yeah, they're bad, but I can show you those that are worse." And these are some of the worst shots that we have. This street I talked about, the cost for these, this is at the upper end of the cost for those streets. This will probably cost us anywhere between $20 and $25 a square yard to repair, because of the amount of work that we have to do in order to get it into good condition. And so for current funding, again, one-year plan, $350,000 a year. We'll be able to do 8 streets. I have a list of streets right on my table. I can tell you which streets. I can tell you which neighborhoods. I can tell you the width of those streets, the length of those streets. I can tell you that Paris Street is on this list because Paris, in your neighborhood, is one of the worst streets on our list. And so the first year plan at $350,000 a year, we won't get the Paris, but we'll be able to do 8 streets. That's not many at all. 10-year plan, again, $350,000 a year, $3.5 million. We'll be able to accomplish about 38 streets. That's not a lot. Under Measure K, our first year of funding, and we'll have the breakdown and show you that later, we'll be able to accomplish paving 28 streets. Over a 10-year period, we'll be able to accomplish having redone 612 streets or more. I'm hoping for more. And so that's the difference in what we have now under our current funding, and this is the difference we would have under Measure K. Thank you for your attention.
Citrus Heights Police Commander Tom Chaplin speaks on crime statistics and the need for additional support.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Commander Tom Chaplin, and I do have the pleasure of appearing here tonight to discuss the other half of Measure K with you, which deals with public safety. I am appearing on behalf of my boss, Chief Chris Boyd, who was not available to attend tonight but did send his regards. Quite frankly, with regards to the public safety in Citrus Heights up to this point, I think we've done a very good job and have had a handle on the crime issues in the community and doing our 3 main functions, which is to reduce crime, to reduce the fear of crime, and really help to improve your quality of life as your police department. Unfortunately, there have been some stark contrasts with the changes we're now dealing with. So I'm going to walk you through some of the current things that we're confronting and some of the expected changes. Current crime challenges include, we have 650 identified gang members that reside within the city of Citrus Heights. We have 150 parolees in the city of Citrus Heights, and in excess of 1,100 people that are on some form of probation. And we also have roughly 200 sex registrants. Our property crime in Citrus Heights has always been very high for a population our size. In fact, under 100,000, we're right up there near the top. And you could even creep into the 120s and find communities that have less property crime than we do. It's always been substantial. We have, however, been able to reduce property crime each year up until now. On average, we have roughly 260 property crimes per month, 42 vehicles stolen per month, and more than 30 residential homes burglarized each month. That's one a day. It's not acceptable to us, and it's numbers that we try to work on every single day, but it's a substantial crime picture. Through July of 2012, we're experiencing an overall 4% increase in assaults, with an overall 3% increase in crimes against persons, a 5% increase in burglaries from the same time period last year, and a 78% increase in auto theft. It is ironic that we meet this evening, because this week marks the 1-year anniversary of Assembly Bill 109, or prison realignment, which is a part of why we're here tonight to discuss some of the things that we're confronting as a result. Thank you. For the first time since we cut the ribbons in front of the police department and took over the streets on June 26th of 2006, we will likely not be able to report to the manager, to the council, and to all of you that we've reduced crime. We have identified several areas that we think could assist us, but we've also identified some other gaps that are preventing us. And one of these is specific to programs to prevent youth crime and violence. We believe very deeply in a two-pronged approach to confronting the crime challenges and issues that we're experiencing in Citrus Heights. First off is an aggressive, zero-tolerance approach to holding criminals to account for the crimes that they commit. But the other approach is to get to kids before they make decisions that are going to likely lead them astray. Career criminals generally don't wake up at the age of 30 years old and decide to start committing criminal offenses. It happens when they're kids. And I was just speaking with some law enforcement professionals who talked about the fact if you were to go through prisons today and talk to prisoners, they would tell you they wish they would have had an opportunity to talk to a leader or someone in law enforcement before they started committing crimes. We want the opportunity to do that. However, what we're faced with right now with school-related programs and other programs to assist youth is there's inadequate funding for these programs. A lot of the after-school programs don't exist anymore. We need to increase participants in the programs we do have. We created a police activities league just over 2 years ago. We already have 300 members. We believe that we can increase this membership to 1,000 and truly impact these kids. We don't think there is currently adequate staffing within the police department to properly address the youth gaps that exist and truly make a difference to intervene and prevent kids from making a wrong decision. One other thing that happened was the Sacramento County Probation Department used to have something known as the Neighborhood Accountability Board, or NAB. I don't know if anyone ever had the opportunity to serve on that, but what would happen was if a child, a youth got arrested for a first-time offense that wasn't violent, they'd have an opportunity to go into the restorative justice piece, where they could maybe do some community service or essentially be diverted from getting into the juvenile justice system. That program has gone away. Another example of what no longer exists that had previously helped us with this issue. There's fewer after-school programs. We do suffer from youth crime in the city of Citrus Heights. We believe there's a lack of drug, crime, and gang prevention education. And quite frankly, we know that we have some kids in our community that are at risk, that they don't have a proper role model. So we're concerned with a couple of different time frames in particular. During the off days when school's not in session, whether for summer break or another vacation, but more importantly, that pivotal gap between getting out of school and the parent coming home from work. We believe we can give the kids an opportunity to make the right choice that could set them on the appropriate path. We also think with increased and improved technology, it would enhance our level of officer safety. Our technology and equipment needs are vast. Our 911 communication center gets a lot of calls. In fact, I brought the numbers from last night just to share with you. The incoming and outgoing calls for one 24-hour shift were 375 calls in and out of that building last night. 274 actual calls for service in the community. So it's extremely busy, and we do have to replace that equipment. Much like if you own a laptop or something else, it doesn't have a tremendous shelf life. And we believe we have to stay on top of our equipment and technology for efficiency, effectiveness, and interoperability. We need to be able to communicate with the other agencies. So let's talk about where we are right now and what I mentioned earlier, which is known as AB 109, Assembly Bill 109, or prison realignment. Essentially what has happened is through legislative action, the responsibility for those that would have generally been housed in the state prisons are now realigned and are now the county's responsibility. Over this 3-year period, or the next 3-year period, it was anticipated that 38,000 people, 38,000 offenders that would have been incarcerated will not be incarcerated. This is a new segment of population that we have to deal with, and that quite frankly, we all have to deal with. This is a direct result of state budget cuts. Again, we're on the 1-year anniversary of its implementation. It came into effect October 2011. It created a new category of offender, which is post-release community supervision. For 150 years in the state of California, we had probation and parole. We were used to that. We knew the status. The probationers, the parolees, they knew the status. And we were able to quickly respond to people that were committing criminal offenses in the community. This created a new category. And at this point, we have 1,465 that are living in Sacramento County and 55 that are living in Citrus Heights. But I will show you as we talk further that we have had contacts and problems with people on this status, what our cops affectionately refer to as AB 109ers, that we've contacted people that do not reside in our community, yet they are in our community committing their criminal offenses. The AB 109 legislation discussed that the only people that would be eligible for this were considered the 3 nons: non-serious, non-violent, and non-sex offenders. However, that only deals with the charge for which they're being judged and sentenced. It has nothing to do with their history. So we have found that these AB 109ers are gang members, they're sex offenders, they're property crime offenders, and that they've had violence in their background. We also know about offenders that approximately 70% reoffend. So that's a 70% recidivism rate. We believe strongly, regardless of the status or what people are known as, AB 109ers, probationers, parolees, that the empirical evidence is that 70% will reoffend. And it makes it more and more difficult to stay on top of this. Since this occurred, we've had over 180 calls for service involving AB 109ers. A couple of recent cases of interest. On August 16th, we had a stolen vehicle and a vandalism arrest off of Greenback Lane and Benet, where the suspect was an AB 109er. In the middle of September, there was a burglary series arrests. This has been happening throughout the county involving Costco and Sam's Clubs of high-end electronics. That was an AB 109er involved as a suspect. And on September 15th of this month, an individual who lives in San Francisco, who was an AB 109er, came to our community driving a stolen vehicle while drunk and led our officers on a short pursuit, turned around and rammed our police officer's vehicle. Fortunately, our officer was not seriously injured. But this is the three non-category, non-violent, non-sex, and non-serious. I tend to disagree with that. Just as a point of interest, last night, for a matter of timely information, at just before 3 a.m. in the morning in the Chuck E. Cheese parking lot, which in that area we do have a criminal activity sometimes, and I would contend that somebody riding a bicycle at 3 a.m. might not be up to any good. 2 subjects were contacted that matched also a description of an interrupted burglary that had occurred the night before. One of the subjects had 14 warrants. His companion was an AB 109er on that classification for possession of stolen property, out there riding a bike at 3 a.m. This is the people that we're dealing with on a nightly basis. So, I'd like to talk to you about proposed solutions. We believe that part of the solution here for us in confronting these new crime challenges, what would assist your police department, is in the area of technology and equipment. And what we need is the ability to track these AB 109ers, because there's a unique component to this. If they don't get in trouble for 6 months, meaning we don't catch anybody doing anything wrong for 6 months, or they just haven't done anything wrong for 6 months, they're no longer on any kind of status and we lose track of them. Based on the fact that 70% will reoffend, we think that's a problem. So we need additional technology to track the AB 109ers. We need to enhance our crime database, utilize equipment and technology for surveillance purposes to increase our opportunity and ability to apprehend these individuals, to monitor them, and to continually enhance our officer safety. Our officers are in harm's way every night, and whatever we can continue to do to assist with their safety is excellent. With regards to the preventing youth and crime violence, we do feel that one youth intervention officer is necessary. And we currently have 2 school resource officers, each assigned to our 2 high schools, and they also service our elementary schools and the junior high school. And our school resource officers every day see the kids that we talked about earlier. These kids that are at a fork in the road and need to make a decision, and hopefully a right decision. The problem is we cannot impact all of these kids in the current state. So we do think that a youth intervention officer would help augment existing programs, enhance some of the things we had. Again, we want to grow our PAL program from 300 to 1,000. We also believe that these the mentoring, the leadership, the values that we could help instill in our youth with a youth officer would be extremely beneficial and is a key part in this overall crime prevention and reduction strategy. With regard specifically to this new category of offender, as well as the other offenders that I pointed out earlier in the numbers with 650 gang members, 1,100 probationers, 150 parolees, we strongly believe that 4 additional detectives are needed to stay on top of the people in our community that might reoffend, to track these AB 109ers, because we will be the only ones that are tracking them, to conduct home visits, to conduct surveillance, to conduct investigations and to hold offenders to account by arresting them. Essentially, we're on our own here. We didn't ask for AB 109, but we haven't. State budget reductions have created this new challenge, this new program, this prison realignment. We truly believe that this new category of offenders, combined with our already high property crime rate and the other challenges and offenders already residing within our city, puts the safety of our community at risk. That's our job every day, is to help provide for a healthy and safe place to live. So even though the state handed us this thing, we are going to need some assistance to fix it. Thank you.
Question and answer period. Community feedback on Measure K.
So at that, I will turn it over to our city manager.
So we are staff, so we can't advocate you to vote for this thing or vote against it. We can only educate you on what it is, and then we get out the room, and then you have the discussion with the pro folks, if you want to take the time to listen to them. So what we want to do is open this up to questions now. Yes?
Well, how did they come up with a 1.75% increase, and will that be enough? Will that be enough? What happens if that's not enough?
Well,
That's,
If
that's
the-
$4 for $5 a month on your
Well-
utility taxes. That's nothing.
well, again, we wanted to try to keep the number as reasonable as we could, but we wanted it to be high enough where we can have that impact. So when I met with the chief to talk to him about his needs to go after the 109 offenders, he got exactly what he asked for in terms of the level that he needed. Now, and that's based on today's information. We don't know what it's going to be like 5 years from now,
Right.
but based on what the state told us that they were going to release and other factors, the chief indicated he needed 5 officers and the resources. So that's how we came about with that. With regard to the street resurfacing, yeah, the more the millions, the more we can put into it. But over a 10-year period, with putting approximately $24–25 million into our streets, we now get them into the vast majority of them into the good to excellent condition, which means the maintenance costs that will go down, and then over the course of that 10 years, we'll be able to add more streets each year. So so if you look at the math, we talk about math a lot these days. You see 28 streets the first day or first year, and then he says over 600 in 10 years. So how do you get to that with only 28 streets? Well, the first 2 or 3 years, we're going to be concentrating on those streets that he showed you the pictures of. They're in the poor condition. They're in the $18 a square foot category. Once we get through those, the first 2 or 3 years, the numbers of streets that he'll be able to do in subsequent years will go up to 30, 40, 50 streets a year. So we felt pretty good. We felt pretty good about that. And again, we wanted to try to have a number that was big enough to have the desired impact, and that's why we feel comfortable with the roughly, $5 or so a month. Yes.
I'm sort of curious because I'm a bicycle rider, and I noticed some of the construction on the streets, and I think there's a lot of substandard construction was done along the way in several cases. And what I'm curious about is there any way of recovering some of the cost of that construction from those contractors that did that substandard construction?
Well, I get a little emotional when I start talking about this. Mayor Slowey mentioned a little bit our infrastructure, the age of our infrastructure. When we became a city, we inherited an infrastructure that's pretty aged. In fact, our infrastructure is one of the oldest in this region. The streets are old, street lights are old, the water mains, and the work that we're doing now, we're discovering all kinds of problems. And so that's the hand we were dealt with. And so when Mr. Tingle talked about what we had to pay the county in order to incorporate, it was based on the assumption that the county made this investment into this infrastructure, so they had to recoup some of those costs. Well, I can tell you that some of the things that I see out there every day, I wouldn't pay a dime for. And so the conditions of some of the streets are in such poor condition that we're dealing with at the beginning. That's what we have right now, and that's what we have to try to repair as a consequence.
I would suggest then that if you have any way of tracking who the contractors were, to see that they don't get any of that work, repair work.
Yeah, it's so far back.
So far back.
Yeah, and the county was responsible for it. I can tell you that there's times when we've gone out to pave streets that people that have lived in the community for a long time have come out and told us all kinds of horror stories, but they tell us that this is the first time in the 30, 40 years that I lived here that I've seen this street being paved. And that's truth all over the community.
Then the other thing is that they don't allocate the gas tax by our traffic. We've got a certain amount of traffic traveling through this city, but somehow or other was that looked into any legally? Saying, wait a minute, we've got this traffic, you're responsible for it.
It doesn't matter.
No.
We should get some of that gas tax money.
Well, I wish. I wish there were toll roads. I wish Sunrise and I wish Auburn Boulevard were toll roads. But other than that, no, we don't.
Well, I will say that some of our regional transportation agencies have been very responsive in terms of our grant funding that they have approved at the regional level. And the projects that David is doing now, a lot of that was because we were successful with those grants. So we do have to give a lot of credit for that. Any more questions? Yes.
Henry, I would like to make a comment.
Sure.
And I've been a resident at Citrus Heights for about 22 years now. When my wife and I moved here, we moved to an area here in Citrus Heights where one day we were barbecuing back of our house, and all of a sudden we heard all these firecrackers. So wow, well, it's not even 4th of July yet. Well, what it was, there was a shootout in front of our house, and here we thought, here we have our children, and we thought, so from that point to where we are today, and from the time where we incorporated to now, I can only tell you that Citrus Heights is like night and day, especially right here, right off of Van Mar and Auburn. That was, excuse my language, but it was a hellhole. So I really appreciate the police department being here. Since their inception, things have changed dramatically. I've seen the drug abuse and all these drug lords that were roaming around here when the county was in place. They were running rampart here. There were a lot of gangs and stuff, and I thank you for doing a great job that you've done, because we have seen dramatic changes, streets, the aesthetics of the city, and the improvements overall have been dramatic, and I wanted to share that with you.
Well, we, on average, we arrest 157 people every month in this city. 157. And that's probably, I don't know if that's an average number or a high number. But one of our goals with dealing with this new law is to make it very difficult for these 109ers to commit crimes in the city. If they know that they're being watched and tracked real closely, chances are if they're going to recommit crime, they'll go into other areas of the county to do that, and not here in Citrus Heights. That's our goal, is to make it very difficult for them to want to create mischief in this community. Did we have a question over here?
No, I was just wanting to make a point that you need to keep these confined to questions.
Oh, okay. Okay. Next question?
That wasn't a question.
Any more questions? Okay. Well, in that case, you guys have been a pretty lively bunch compared to some of the other situations. but that's good. We need that. I do want to thank each and every one of you for coming out this evening to hear our presentation. The council and the Measure K committee is going to talk a little bit about the measure and why they're supporting it. And on that note, staff is going to excuse themselves from that part of the discussion. So again, thank you so much for coming.
Mayor Jeff Slowey's comments on Measure K.
Thank you, Henry. Before I speak, I think we owe staff here for coming out and giving us this fine presentation a round of applause. You know, I was one of the four who put this on the ballot, and I got to be honest with you, I struggled, you know, whether it was the right thing to do. But at the end of the day, I think after you listen to the presentation, these are real numbers, these are real things that each and every one of us are facing. I've lived in the city for 22 years. You know, I sat on the Measure A committee. I understand exactly what happened, why we lost that almost $4 million to the other cities. You know, a lot of those folks usually vote with us, but you know, if you can get an $80 million freeway overpass at the expense of another city, you're going to vote yes against. You know, so I was the lone no vote down there. But I think what's really telling is, you know, and Henry mentioned it, we are a city today that has no debt, and yes, we have money in the bank. We've done that because, you know, we thought long term. And some people will say, well, you know, you got a lot of money in the bank. We do have a reasonable amount of reserves.
Louder, please.
Okay. But the bottom line is we are not in a position, and the economy is not in a position to continue to add to those reserves. I think Henry showed you the numbers. You know, you can't commit future money and yet pull it out and then say you can still use it. I think the AB 109 issue in our police department is very telling. You know, I would put the men and women of our police department up against any in the state. I think the last 6.5 years that they've been here, they've showed us what real police work can do and how to make a dent in crime. With the prisoners that are coming out under this, you know, far-fetched AB 109, they are going to be stretched very thin. And personally, I believe one of the fundamental obligations of government is public safety. I do not ever want to hear that the criminals on the street, one, outnumber the police, or two, have better equipment than the police. You know, the numbers that were shown, $5, I'm not trying to make light of it, but you know, that's a latte and a half a month that you're giving up to support your police department. I don't think I have to sell the roads to you. Anybody who drives them know, you know, we inherited old infrastructure from the county, so I'm going to leave that. That's just, to me, that's a no-brainer. You know, you see that every day. I think everybody realizes the police are doing a good job, and now to hear them say, you know, we need more money, I think you really need to understand what they're going through. The calls for service, that's roughly 12,000 calls a month that our officers respond to. We have 86 sworn officers that cover you 24/7, 7 days a week, but that includes some of the command staff. So really, there's, you know, a few less that are out there. I think if you really look at an arrest, does anybody know how long it takes once an officer arrests a prisoner and they get back to Citrus Heights? It's anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours. They have to drive them downtown to the prison, come back, you know, do all the paperwork that's there. And that means every arrest we make, those officers are off the street. I would love to say let's add 10 officers. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. I think for AB 109, one for the youth, it's probably a very minimal number, but that's what we're asking for. You know, we're not going to sugarcoat it. It is an increase in attacks. You know, we're asking you folks to dig a little deeper, and I know the state is, other agencies are, but I look at this as this is local. This is for you. This is for your city. If you like where we are, you know, and you want to stay there, I think it's worth a yes vote. At the end of the day, if it doesn't pass, is the city going to fold up? Are we going to lay off people? No, we're going to do the best we can, but I guarantee you the numbers from the crimes are going to go up from our police department. They can't be everywhere. They need you folks out there watching for them. And again, I think it's again, don't make light of it, but it's $6 a month is what we're asking for. And I got to tell you, and I say this affectionately to Henry, if anybody knows Henry, if there was any way that he could have done this without looking at a tax increase, my friend Tightwad Tingle would have come up with it versus coming out and asking you folks to be looking at a tax increase. So with that, I'll turn it over to Vice Mayor Steve Miller.
Thank you, Jeff.
Vice Mayor Steve Miller comments on Measure K.
Hey, give yourself a hand for being so patient tonight sitting through this presentation. But it is about getting the facts. This is an important decision. It is a tax. I see it as an investment in our city, an investment in our safety, our investment in our children, an investment in our streets. I'm trying to think of a cute term for all the potholes, and I call it the pothole polka going down my road. And it's gotten so rote, and maybe this happened with you, I kind of know how to steer my car now down the streets. But when I got a cup of coffee, the dance becomes very interesting going down the road. But to be serious about it, what's the return on this investment? My house is a little underwater. Well, it's a lot underwater. It's a submarine. I don't know your particular cases as far as the value of your homes, but I do believe if we take this positive step, if you really look at the facts and vote yes on this, it will increase the attractiveness of our city and hopefully raise our property values. So when you take that $5 and multiply it times 12, that's 60, right, Stephanie?
Yes.
Good. I'm getting it right this time. So about $600 over 10 years. If that brings $10,000 value to my house, I'm right side up. And that's how I look at it, as an investment in our city. And the other thing, and I don't know that we've talked about it, is it also brings private sector jobs. And that's something else that we're hurting for. And I don't know exactly what that number would be, but I know it's more than 30 a year. I don't know if it's more than 100 a year if we pass this, but it would bring some much needed private sector jobs. So I urge you to look at the facts, make a decision, and vote yes on Measure K. Thank you. And with that, I introduce Councilmember Mel Turner. Thanks, guys.
Rick Doyle from Yes on Measure K Committee speaks on supporting Measure K.
All I can do is present the information, and ultimately you have to decide whether it's something that you want to pursue or not. But I want to mention about three things, if I can, just in brief summary. And all three of those things are adjectives. Citrus Heights is unique, and I think, show of hands maybe, how many people have you lived here more than 15 years? A lot of you. So most of you will remember what this city was like 20 years ago and what it is today. What's happened since we've incorporated is Citrus Heights is one of only 2 cities in the state of California. There's 482 cities in the state of California. We're one of only 2 that can put 3 adjectives together in one sentence. We're debt-free, we're fiscally sound, and we have money in the bank. The other city is Highland, California. They get property tax revenue, we don't. So we got momentum going here, I'm telling you, and I'm proud of these guys. For goodness sakes, we've got a city manager that I think walks on water and parts seas. We've got a chief of police. Let me tell you something, this is a brand spanking new police department. It's just turned 6 years old. First 5 years of its operation, it reduced crime in every category every year, 5 years in a row. It came in under budget every year, 5 years in a row. And in March of this year, the California Police Chiefs Association flew up here to Sacramento to award Chief Boyd with the James Q. Wilson Award, which just happens to give Citrus Heights Police Department the #1 community-oriented policing department in the state of California. Number 2 was Riverside. We're in the big leagues, and these people put us there. Henry Tingle is a manager, he's a leader, he's a problem solver. Chief Boyd is a manager, a leader, and a problem solver. And both of them are paid to anticipate problems, get out ahead of them, figure out what it's going to take to solve them, and then implement that solution when they're given the authority to do so. You're their authority, and they need your help. You've got to give them the go-ahead on this thing, or no, it doesn't matter. But Henry's said earlier tonight, he's put a very high threshold on this doggone thing, 2/3 majority, and he's doing that for the sole purpose of seeing to it that this money is used specifically for the purposes that he's laid out, and the chief has laid out. It's to be used for, and it can't be diverted in any other way. That's huge. We've got momentum going here in Citrus Heights. This is our city. I'm proud of it, and I know most of you are too. And so we need to get ahead of this doggone thing, and that 2/3 majority is a big pill to climb. I won't lie to you. That survey that he mentioned earlier says that we've got a 58% approval rating on that measure. Okay. If we get that up to 65%, it fails. We've got to get it to 66% and beyond to get this thing to go forward. So, you're the first neighborhood association that's seen these. These were published today at 5 o'clock. I need your help. We want to get people asking, what the hell is Measure K? And that's all this sign is designed to do. And if you can, I've got some with me tonight. I'll be happy to leave them with you. And if you plant it in your lawn for the next 30 days, we'd really appreciate it. We also have to mention that this is a grassroots program. Jack, you've got some info as well before you even do that. It's a grassroots program. The city can't spend money on this doggone thing. Again, the Fair Political Practices Commission is saying, hey, it's your measure, but you can't support it financially because you're spending taxpayers' money to raise taxes. Doesn't make sense, so they can't. So it's a grassroots campaign, strictly grassroots, and it's the citizens that are supporting this doggone thing. That survey that we said had 58% approval rating, they also mentioned the City Council has a 75% approval rating on that latest survey. That's unheard of. The average City Council approval rating in California for all those 482 cities is 17%. Citrus Heights drew a 75%. That's our strength. That's our strength. These problem solvers, these people that know how to get things done and get us out ahead of these programs and these problems have done their job. And their job is legendary. Now it's time for us to do our job and get behind them and support this measure. I sit on the Planning Commission at the pleasure of the City Council, and I just want to say one thing that the Planning Commissioner, I've seen the 10-year plan for this city between now and 2020, and one of the things it asks us, and we're looking forward to do, is making Citrus Heights a quote-unquote destination city. What's destination? Destination, we want young families to move here, to buy our homes, to raise their families, to be in homes that are going to go up in value, not just hold steady or depreciate. They're not coming, I'll guarantee you that, unless those streets are well maintained and upkept, and most importantly, where they're safe, where they can raise their children, send them to good schools, they can walk in the park, they can bring their dogs out on weekends and walk around and not worry about drive-by shootings or gangs or drugs or any of those things. We got out ahead of this thing. We got to stay ahead of it. We got the momentum going here now. And this measure is going to keep us ahead and bring that destination city moniker to the city of Citrus Heights. So help us out if you can. Jack is going to pass some envelopes around. If you can afford to put $5 in an envelope, and goodness sakes, send it to us. We got to pay for these signs. And we've got to send, we want to send a letter out signed by our city manager, or not, by our city council, indicating that the council is 100% behind this program. Those will go out, we hope, next week as the voter returns and start going out. That's all I got. Thanks for your time.
Jack Frost from Yes on Measure K Committee speaks about supporting Measure K.
The Measure K website is voteyesonmeasurek.com. So we want you to talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to people that you work with. Send them to the Measure K website so that they can view the video in case they don't have time to come out to one of the town hall meetings. One of the other statistics that's really interesting is they took another recent survey where 62% of Americans have said, you know, if we really trusted our government, we give them more money. But we don't trust our government to spend the money the way they say they're going to spend the money. And one of the things that Henry Tingle did when he pushed the 66% vote is he said, we want the people's approval, and we want to be able to put this money in a lockbox to ensure that it's going to be spent the way that we said it was going to be spent, so that the money stays in the community. And for those of you that understand supply and demand, and it looks like a lot of people tonight voiced the concern that their homes are underwater, if you know anything about supply and demand, if you look around the country, there are pockets in the country where home prices aren't going down, home prices are going up. And what is creating home prices going up in those communities? Is the communities are where people want to go. And when people are moving into the community and there's more demand for homes because more people want to live there instead of people moving out, the home values go up. And Henry made that point. When the businesses and the neighborhoods are safe because we have adequate police protection, and when the roads look great, people want to move to those kind of communities. So if we want to take the long-term approach, we want our home values to go up in the future, Measure K is an investment in getting our home values going back in the right direction. So $25, $50, whatever you can afford, throw it in the envelope. We hope you'll help us out. And thank you very much.